Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well as we move through the most of February 2025. Geez, already into 2025 and I'm still messing up a little bit. But anyways, hope everybody's doing well. This is our 900th show, 900th episode of the Cloudcast. Very excited to have reached this sort of milestone. It's been a long time coming. I think we've been doing this for 15 years now. We've been doing it since 2011. So yes, it'll be our 15th year of doing it. So excited to still be with you all. Excited to still be excited about doing this. But 900th show. We, typically don't, kind of talk about ourselves a whole lot, but we did get a couple of recognitions this past couple of weeks, couple of months or so. Best technology podcast. We've been ranked anywhere from we're number 1 all the way down to maybe number 10 or so. Best technology podcast, top cloud computing podcast. I think we were ranked number 2 or 3. Top software engineering podcast. I think we were number 3. And top IT podcast, we were in the top 5 or 8 or something. So thank you to everybody who listens. Thanks to everybody who tells a friend, gives us ratings in all the places that you rate the podcast, whether it's an Apple or Spotify or wherever it is. It's nice to be recognized for the work that we do, but most importantly, it's nice to be recognized that we're providing something that's of value to people. And it's so for that we thank you very much. So number 900, hoping to at least get to 1,000. That's kind of our goal in the back of our mind, but. Anyways, we're on a 900, and today I want to talk a little bit about this idea that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, just ever since the DeepSeek stuff came along, what's been a month or so now. And what I got to thinking about was, for a lot of industries, you don't necessarily have, a kind of a watershed moment. You don't necessarily have something that completely changes your industry. And we'll see if DeepSeek ends up becoming something that is a significant change to the IT landscape. But at least for a few days there, it got a lot of us thinking, we had sort of been, living by a certain set of kind of commonly held beliefs, at least in the AI space, at least around the economics of AI and, how AI was being created, whether it was around models and so on and so forth. And then DeepSeek kind of came along and kind of flipped that model at least partially on its head. And, we're still kind of learning more about it. People are playing with it. People are kind of digging into digging into what really happened and all those sort of things. And we may, come to realize here in a few months that, it wasn't as big of a deal as we thought it was at the time. But for now, it does feel like at least a moment that kind of reset some expectations around the industry. And with that going on, it kind of got me thinking, what is, if you were talking to folks across any industry, whether it's financial services or energy or automotive or healthcare or, whatever it might be, government, what is your industry's DeepSeek moment? And, how are you going about planning for it? How are you going about strategizing for it so that you're not on the unexpected end of whenever that thing comes out? And it got me thinking, what, from an industry perspective, if you're running a company, if you were thinking about your industry, how are you thinking about a moment? And again, it doesn't have to have anything to do with AI. I just use DeepSeek as a starting point. How much are you thinking about that thing that will change your industry? That thing that may come as an unexpected, or is there something that's already going on in your industry that is beginning to sort of bubble up, is beginning to sort of change some of the calculations around how your industry works? And how well are you planning for that? Are you taking it seriously? Are you thinking, well, maybe it won't necessarily be that big of a change? And I'm not necessarily talking about things like industry consolidation, because we see that happen all the time. Industries, companies within the industries, you're the number 2, number 1 company buys the number 4 or 5 company, and we see consolidation around those sort of things. We've seen those for decades and decades. I'm not necessarily talking about, when we have things like wars, although obviously, those happen and they're terribly unfortunate and so forth. And they have some short-term impacts to things like the economy and, maybe travel and other types of things, trade. Not necessarily talking about pandemics. Obviously, we all lived through a pandemic the last couple of years, and we saw how people adjusted to that. But those aren't necessarily like, completely changing things. I guess pandemic was sort of a completely changing thing, and that it changed, how and where we worked and so forth. But we adapted to that. Obviously, there are things like interest rates that will change, but those don't necessarily change like on a moment's notice. Like there isn't this, this pending, like, I don't know if we're going to figure out if there is a 3% interest rate around the corner somewhere. Those things kind of get signaled, and we see how markets change over quarters, and in some cases, 6 months or a year and so forth. So those aren't necessarily like completely unexpected. They can, we may see a rate go up and down that's maybe not totally projected or predicted, but it's not unexpected. And so I'm kind of thinking about, just kind of the basic questions that if a DeepSeek moment happened in your industry. So for example, let's take like autonomous driving, right? Let's suppose that overnight, a huge number of automobiles, or the way that people were transported, just at a human level, maybe not necessarily like packages and supplies and so forth, but humans were transported, through autonomous vehicles. What would that change mean? Because right now, the vast majority of automobiles are still driven by people, and so you've got some basic things, like would the rate of accidents change? Would how they're serviced changed? Would the volume of traffic on roads change? Would where people live change in terms of those things? And so that to me feels like one of those things that could have, significant changes happening. Now, we're all sort of aware that there's a possibility that autonomous driving will come along at some point in time and be possible at a price point that people are willing to accept and so forth. But, that feels like one that's sort of bubbling under the surface and so on and so forth. There's if there was a real breakthrough in how fast drug discovery happened or drug approvals happen, right? Right now, it takes maybe a decade or so to not only discover something new, but to get it through the process, assuming everything goes well. What would that look like if there was a way overnight to get rid of obesity, or to get rid of cancer, or to get rid of diabetes or Alzheimer's, or any of the number of huge diseases and things that impact people's life from a health perspective. What would that mean, right? Would it mean that we would suddenly have a length of life that's 10 years longer? Would we have a completely different food supply chain that people are eating, or something along those lines? Would it change where people live in terms of where they live near food, where they live near healthcare, where they live near all those sort of things? So I feel like that's something that could be a huge thing. But it got me thinking, from a DeepSeek perspective, if the thing that happened in your industry that was a significant change, and again, I don't have expertise in every single industry, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But it got me thinking about a couple of questions. First one was, how much of your IT budget, right? So let's assume that these days every business decision is fundamentally also going to be tied directly to some sort of technology decision, because nowadays they just sort of go hand in hand. It's very hard to find any business project that doesn't have some significant technology component to it, whether it's rolling out a new set of applications, or whether it's rolling out a new set of ways to interact with data, whatever that might be. So how much of your IT budget in a year could shift if your industry had some sort of, let's call it a DeepSeek moment, right? Something that significantly changed the economics of what you did, significantly changed maybe the time cycle of what your company is or your industry is sort of moving towards. How much of that could you shift, right? Right now, we tend to sort of say that 70 to 80% of IT budgets are fairly fixed. They're sort of accounted for just to keep the lights on and to pay for the existing systems. But how much could you realistically shift if something huge came along, right? That's the first question I've been asking myself. The second one is how much change or adjustment or adaptation could your workforce do in a year, right? If an opportunity came along, could your company hire 50% more people than they have today? Could you, how much could you do with 50% less people, right? Could you train 20%, 25% of the people in your organization for a completely new skill set, right? Do you have mechanisms in place to train them and make them proficient, let's say within a year, right? So I think that's sort of an important consideration to make. And then the last one that I sort of had in mind is how much could you change the business model of your company in a year? So if your company today, for example, everything is done on an annual basis, right? Like you get all the money sort of upfront for something. How much of that could you change? Could you change to a weekly subscription? Could you change the cash flows of your business, or could you change the mechanism in which you collect from your customers significantly? Is that possible, right? If something came along that was completely different, could you go about doing that? What would happen if you couldn't collect from your customers until 3 months later than you typically do, right? Like, how much of that do you think could change? How much, if everything you were doing was a direct sale, for example, how much of that could change to become an indirect sale through a third party, through a partner, through some channel, through some marketplace, through some vehicle? How much of that could change? Next thing I had on my list was, what law or regulation does your company fear the most, right? What thing that could be bubbling up within your country's government, within some discussion that's happening because of change of power in the regime that's running the company or the country, whether it's a shift in sort of the mandate from the people. What is that law or regulation that your company fears the most, right? Whether it's something that outlaws what you do, that mandates that something that you do becomes twice as expensive so that there's an alternative that wouldn't have been there before. Maybe there is something that adds multiple years to you being able to deliver what you do. Is there a law or regulation that your company fears the most? And if so, what would you do if that came into place, right? And obviously, companies try and do a lot of things to make sure they sort of stay ahead of these things. There are, there's lobbying, there's, sort of backroom things that go on. But we do see, regime changes. We do see change in the world that happens sometimes faster than expected. Is there something that your company fears the most? And then, the last piece is, what government decision would most impact your company or industry? And that's sort of a variation of the same thing of, is there a law or something? I say that just in the context of, like, maybe you're thinking, okay, there's a law, but laws take a certain amount of years to get to. Just to use an example, here in the United States, we have this concept called an executive order, which sort of allows the president to kind of unilaterally make certain decisions. Now, they don't always go through. They're not always considered lawful. But in some cases, they can have significant impact. And we're seeing that here, right? We're seeing that today with, the number of programs that are being cut, or the number of dollars that are being reappropriated to different places, and so on and so forth. So, I've been thinking about a bunch of these things, and I'm very curious kind of how other people are adapting to it. And I'm in particular kind of thinking about it from a technology perspective of, do the systems you have in place, are they able to adapt to things, right? Are they able to adapt to bringing on new capabilities? How would you add new capabilities that you just have absolutely no understanding of today, right? And AI is kind of a good example of that, because for most companies, if you ask most of your workers, hey, I need you to be an expert in AI tomorrow, not necessarily to be a data scientist, but use it to, maybe you put a mandate on your folks and you said, hey, I'm going to need you to all be 25% more productive tomorrow. Is that possible? And, do you have kind of the wherewithal, whether it's the systems in place, the ability to automate things, the ability to scale things up and down, the ability to have flexible architectures that can change what's going on? Do you have that ability to do that? Do you have the ability, if the world that you work in, the market that you work in, the industry and the regulations that you work in, if those change significantly, if, for example, you needed to now interact with a set of APIs that you'd never interacted with before, what's your ability to do that, right? What's your ability to, put the right security in place to deal with that, to have, the right kind of software development to be able to interact with those systems. What's your ability to do those type of things as well? And so I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I don't necessarily know exactly what the answer to that is. I have some things in mind that I think would be important for customers. And I think a lot of them have to do with, looking at how much flexibility does your business have? How much flexibility do your IT systems have? That doesn't necessarily mean that you would swap everything out, but do you have the ability to adapt the latest innovation? Do you have the ability to adapt, twice as much capacity overnight? Do you have the ability to, move workloads or move data if regulations kick in and they change, they sort of dictate that you need to be in a private environment instead of a public environment, or you need to be in multiple clouds as opposed to just one cloud. Do you have those kind of capabilities? Is that something that would cripple your business, or is that something that you would look at and you would say, oh, okay, that's just something that we've planned for. We haven't necessarily implemented it, but we know how we'd go about doing that. And anyways, I bring all this up, partially because it got me thinking when DeepSeek happened. We went from a mindset within our industry that AI was going to be done a certain way, and people were making investments, aligned to that sort of way of thinking. And then it kind of happened, and it made a lot of people kind of rethink what was needed, what was right, what was necessary, all those types of things. But it got me thinking, this could happen really in any industry. And again, I sort of threw out a bunch of things that could be changing things. And it makes you kind of wonder, especially given the amount of kind of volatility that we have, kind of across the world right now at the government level, at the, the ability for people to organize online, all that sort of stuff. It feels like we're going to see, more change happen faster. Again, it may not be always positive change. It may not always be negative change, but change that comes along that may be unexpected, and kind of really, asking yourself, like, how well prepared is our business from a technology perspective, the systems we have in place, the flexibility, the agility, adaptability of those systems. How well are we able to, make sure our people are prepared, or that we can get the right people in place if the people we have, if something changes and they become the wrong people or not efficient enough people. And then, how much could our business change in terms of, the business model that we have, the way in which we, take our products to market, collect money from revenues, be able to match our revenues with our expenses on a timely basis, and so on and so forth. So sort of our go-to-market mechanism, our business model mechanism. And I feel like it's something that, while, there's always contingencies in place for things like disaster recovery and business continuity planning, like if something fails, how much are we thinking about change, and how much do we trickle down that change down to the technologists, the technology systems, and to sort of ask them, how well prepared could you handle this, right? And we learned a little bit about ourselves. We probably learned a lot about ourselves when COVID happened, because it forced us to go through some of these changes, right? Like, how can we operate if people don't go in the office? How can we operate if we can't put our hands on systems? How can we, suddenly spin up a bunch of resources? And so, I think we've seen the beginning of what this could look like, but, essentially we went back to kind of a world that was the same world we had before, just, with distance between us, right? To avoid getting sick and getting ill. But I do wonder, do people think enough about, what if my industry changes, right? What if the economics around my industry change? What if the technology around my industry changes, the right sweet spot of people change for those sort of things? So anyway, something to think about. I tried to, with these, sort of 100 shows, 800, 900, eventually 1,000 maybe, try and think a little bit bigger in terms of the question that we're asking ourselves for the Sunday perspective or the weekend perspective. And this is the one I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks. And I think I don't have necessarily all the answers for it, but I do think there is a logical, sort of rational way of thinking about this, and starting to put a little bit of this thinking into the systems that we build. Again, thinking about, kind of what ifs, right? Like, what if our industry changed? how far away are we potentially from something like that happening? Are we prepared if a competition or a startup or somebody in our industry or even an outsider from our industry comes along with a sort of a DeepSeek moment into whatever industry that you're a part of? So anyway, something to think about. I'd love to hear if how people go about thinking about this in their industry, maybe what those concerns and those fears are in your industry. Would love to sort of hear from folks and kind of dig into okay, how might financial services handle that? How might healthcare handle that? How might pharma handle that? How might automotive handle it? And all the the things that impact our day-to-day lives. So anyways, with that sort of shorter show today, hope that's okay with everybody. Hope you all are doing well. Hope the weather is starting to get a little bit better wherever you live. I know we went through another crazy sort of storm here in North Carolina. I got a bunch of snow, which was unexpected, but it's starting to warm up. So that's good. Daylight savings is right around the corner. We're just a couple of weeks from that. So that's exciting. It's staying lighter later, which is always good. But anyways, hope you all are doing well, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.